Our topic today is data collection, the key to success in analytics. Now there's a lot of talk out there about big data and doing analytics. Well, if we don't properly collect that data, it's hard to have some meaningful analytics. So let's talk about data collection. So the first thing is, well, why do we need to collect data? Well, the first key is we really need to understand where we are. Where are we now? All right? And then we need to be able to determine what are the consequences of the things that we've been doing, the consequences of our actions. So our analytics, using the data that we collect, can tell us where we are and what has happened due to the things that we have done. All right, so that's a key to this whole thing about analytics and big data. Is before you get started, you really need to think about how are you going to apply this analytics. All right, so if we can take this equation, the big Y, the output, the thing that we're trying to make an improvement on, and it might be multiple outputs that we're considering. It is a function of some of these inputs. And these inputs are associated with our process. So what are those inputs which lead us to things we need to collect data on, besides just the output that we want to be looking at? So let's start with, let's say that we have some output that we need to get some information on. All right, so here's this output. Now the first thing we've got to do is to make sure that we can evaluate that output based on the customer's viewpoint. How does the customer view that? How important to the customer is that? All right, so that's key. It also helps us to understand what are those most important outputs that we want to do our analytics on. Then we got to start thinking about, okay, well, in our process, what are these X's, these variables, these things that take place in our process that we can probably adjust and control and modify. And they're things that we do, all right? These are the actions that we take. So what are some of those things? Well, one of them might be, what's our strategy? All right? What's our measurement system? All right? How do we do communications? What are the tools that we use in our process? All right, here's one that's really important. Policies, procedures, work instructions. All right, how about any materials that we may use? These are all X's, these variables that are in our process. All right, we do things with these. That's our actionable items. So what is the consequence of these actions on our output from the customer's viewpoint? Well, that is where this thing that's really important to us, that is where the analytics come into play. But if we don't have good data, we're not going to have significant results from our analytics. That's the point. All right, so let's get started going down a path of understanding the best things and best practices associated with data collection. The first one is operational definitions. This is key because here is where we're going to describe in detail the characteristic that you are going to measure. All right? How are you going to measure that characteristic? And then how are you going to make a decision about that characteristic, whether it's good or it's bad? All right, so I have to understand the characteristic, understand how I'm going to measure it, make a decision about it, and I have to have this described in great detail. That's an operational definition. That's a starting point. So a key point about operational definitions. They should use the acronym, and this is one I created, USMART. Useful to both you and the customer. It has to be specific. It has to be measurable. It is not ambiguous. It has to be repeatable and reproducible and terse and to the point and understandable by all. That's USMART. And if our operational definitions are use-smart, we'll be able to use them successfully. And we'll get good data so that we'll end up with good analytics. Garbage in is garbage out. So data collection planning. We've got to put a plan together. All right, so what is the purpose of getting all this big data? If there is no purpose, then you're not going to figure out the purpose from the data. You've got to have a reason to go get that data. And there's got to be a purpose. And so then you can think about, where should you get the data? What kind of data? How much data? How often? Who's going to collect it? What are the measurement tools? And if I have measurement tools and assessments and the ability to look at something, how reliable is that measurement system? Because if I don't have a reliable measurement system, how can I depend on that data to give me good analytics? All right, so I have to have a lot of belief in the value and the quality of that data, so that when I do the analytics, I can believe the statistics and say, yes, this is meaningful. All right, so it all starts with the data. All right, so building the data collection plan. All right, now the first thing it starts with, and this is really a key thing, what is it you're trying to figure out? Make a list of questions about the things that you want to learn about your process, about your customers, about that output, about the input variables. What are the things that you want to learn? What are the things you want to discover? So you make a list of questions. From that comprehensive list of questions, it's going to be really easy to figure out the type of data that you're going to need to answer each of the questions. How are you going to then measure that particular data to answer that question? Stratification factors, and these are really key, because if we don't collect stratification factors, you can't go back into your analytics later and try to figure something out about the stratification. So stratification could be associated with demographics. It could be association with the city location, with a state, with a country. It could be related to the climate from an environmental standpoint. It could be related to the time of day of the week of the month of the year, the seasonality associated with it. What about a different location, a different building, a department? All right, all of these things are stratification factors. So when we collect our data, we also need to understand how the stratification factor is tied to that particular piece of information that we just collected. Because if we have the stratification factors, we can go in and analyze, do they make a difference or not, or doing our analytics. Some of the questions that we may have will be related to stratification factors. All right? Sampling plan. How much data do you need? Because we have to have a certain amount of data so that our analytics will be meaningful. Where and how is the data going to be collected? That's very important. I mean, where are you going to get it? How are you going to get it? Measurement, system analysis, and controls. We need to make sure that we've got repeatable, reproducible measurements so that we can rely on our data. So we can say that this is good data. And if we've got good data, when we do our analytics, we'll be able to say that we've got good analytics and we can trust and believe what we learn from that. All right, so it's all well and good to be able to crunch the numbers, but if we don't have good, reliable data, we may get led down the wrong path with the analytics. So it all starts with the data. It has to have integrity, and our measurement system is part of that integrity. Then the logistics, and this is a really key part of the plan. The who, the what, the where, the when, the how. All right? So if I can build this data collection plan, use good solid operational definitions, understand my process enough to know which are the input variables that I should get data on, understand the outputs that are important to my customer and how they perceive them, then I'm going to be able to use the analytics with the data that I collected to build that understanding of where I am now, and also to understand the consequences of my actions. So that is why data collection is the key to successful analytics.